Facts.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to shift the conversation a little bit and talk about the Freedman Bank story.
Okay.
Right. So my whole thing is like financial literacy, right? I love talking about money and really just bringing financial freedom, right, to our people, right? Because I think a lot of these issues stem from not having the money or having great financial skills that can get us out of certain positions and things like that, right? So a lot of times I try to tell people, like, challenge everything. Like everything, good or bad, right? Challenge things, right? Because when you ask questions, when you challenge things, you learn, right? And a lot of times we just some people accept things for what it is, right? So like the term shoebox money or putting money under the mattress, right? I try to tell my students that, like, some of the mindsets that have been passed down generationally is caused from an experience that has happened to people. Yeah. Right. So I want to talk about the Freedman's Bank story and how that has messed up the mindset of how some Black people choose to save or invest their money.
Yeah. I don't even know if I would say messed up. I think that has allowed for some of us to develop defense mechanisms to be able to strategically navigate through these systems in a way in which we can survive. Yeah. So it's a defense mechanism and a survival tactic. And for those who aren't aware, what Ms. Duah is alluding to, the Freedman's Bank story, the Freedman's Bank was an institution that was developed by the government post-Civil War, which essentially was a bank that was initially created, and then there were several branches that were developed, and it was supposed to be a secured way for Black folk, or a place for Black folk to put in their money, the money in which some of those would be working as sharecroppers, business persons, a wide variety of different people who had access to capital and or were earning capital.
What's capital? Remember, you're talking to kids.
Well, you tell me, what's capital?
Capital is money, y'all. Yeah. Capital is money, right? Capital is how people like to talk about money. And
Or one way, you got social capital.
Yeah, social capital as well, right?
Relationship capital, like, your name. You want to keep your name good because people can vouch for you.
Yes.
Emotional capital, being able to understand different situations. But in this particular situation, we're talking about financial capital, so money.
Yeah, so form of currency, like something,
So people would put their money, Black folk were putting their money, and this is post-Civil War. So if I'm not mistaken, I think the first Freedman's Bank was opened in 1867. See, 1867, 1871. You could fact check me there. I don't have the year right off the top of my head. But in any event, persons put their money in the bank. People were, putting their life savings in this bank, consistently putting their money in the bank. And the Freedman's Bank was owned by a group of white men. There were no Black people on the board. And the white men misappropriated the funds. The CEO was stealing some of the money. He had a gambling debt, or had a gambling problem. We used some of the money for his gambling debt. The Freedman's Bank board as a whole bet on, or excuse me, these individuals who were on the board, some of them were also CEOs and or leaders of other banking institutions. So they would take the Freedman's Money's bank and put it into their bank to go and make faulty loans. They would go and use it for horrible investments, whether that be like in the real estate market, whether that be in the transit market, like the railroad systems that was developing and whatnot. And long story short, they lost the money. And Black people's entire life savings were lost.
It was like trillions. It would have been like today's trillions.
The equivalent of nearly $1 trillion. And essentially, during the end, they tried to bring in a famous Black person. And I'll let you all do the research to find out who that was.
Frederick Douglass.
I'll let you all do the research to find out who that was. This person who white people just thought, well, if there's anybody who could fix it, this person could. And when he got in and saw the books, he essentially said that this was a train that already had left the train tracks. And he was so saddened because he said that the loss of resources in this bank was the equivalent of Black people having to serve another 10 years in slavery.
Wow.
And when you now hear, or, if you hear your grandparents or your great grandparents, or even just some people, being very non-trusting of banks or financial institutions, won't put their money in the bank, put their money in a mattress or in a shoebox, as Aaliyah alluded to. A lot of that goes back to the mistrust that a lot of us had to have because they lost their money. Their generations or future generations who maybe could have used that money to do a wide variety of different things, they lost their life savings on a promise from the U.S. government.
That's crazy. What's good, y'all? Are y'all having a hard time starting conversations in large rooms? Do you need to find more effective ways to draw attention to yourself without wearing a fancy outfit? I figured out a hack. You need some Financial Revolution merch. Everything is a staple piece that represents Black wealth. You are what you wear, so make sure you join the rest of the billionaires and get some FR merch. We have hoodies, sweatsuits, t-shirts, and much more. Make sure you visit www.financialrevolutionn.com and use code podcast for a special 10% off. Again, go to www.financialrevolutionn.com and use code podcast for a special 10% off. Let's get it, y'all. Yeah. That's a crazy story, and I'm glad that you shared that, right? Because a lot of people don't know that story at all, and like I said, like some people just take things for what it is, and we just adopt these mindsets that have been passed down onto us without knowing the history of where that mindset came. Right. And now if we learn how, like, okay, there's a whole board now, there's a whole government agency called the FDIC, right? Where now our money's insured, right? And things like that. Now we can kind of operate a little differently because times are different, right? So I want to ask you, based off of that story, right? How can we, as people, not allow past traumas to, one, like, stop projecting it onto other people, right? But also, like, just not make it a generational thing, because I see how, like, that has not helped us. As so in some ways it has, right? It has, in some ways it has, because, like, some defense mechanisms are good because it teaches us, like, all right, next time I'm in war, let me not do that. However, in some ways it holds us back because now we're scared to do something.
Well, I think it's important to understand that there still are a whole lot of Black folk who are more than willing and